What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're doing an update on Salamangreat, a deck that got back one of its key cards that was banned for such a long time, and now with Mirage Stalio back, Salamangreat has the potential to become one of the best decks of the new format, and a deck that a lot of people choose to play because it's such a budget deck. There are a couple cards in the deck that are not so budget, but I'm pretty sure that people can find alternatives for these cards. They're not absolutely necessary, so that doesn't stop anyone from buying the deck even if they can't break the bank for certain cards, and still this deck is such a powerhouse now. It's much more consistent than it used to be. It can do its plays much more consistently. So now, without further ado, I present to you the update Salamangreat deck. But before we begin, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now, let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with Salamangreat monsters, of course, have to play the one Gazelle. There is not really much to say about this card. It sends everything from the deck to the grave. It's special summon itself, pretty much self-explanatory. 3 copies of Foxy. Now, before Stalio, people were playing 2 copies of Foxy and 2 copies of Spinny, and that's because the level 3 monsters did not really serve a purpose other than being link fodder, which you didn't really care that much about because anything could be link fodder. But now with Stalio back, it's absolutely necessary that you max out both on Foxy and Spinny, because aside from being stuff that you can use for Wolf and for Bailings, now you need them in order to go for your Mirage Stalio. And there is one fact about Mirage Stalio that people aren't really paying attention to. We never had Mirage Stalio during the Master Rule revision, so we always had to put it under the link monster, under the link arrow of a link monster, or in the extra monster zone. But now we can put it wherever we want in the main monster zone without even having to use a link monster, and that might sound trivial, but it actually isn't. It might make the deck even a lot better than it used to be, just because when you don't have something to link summon first, if you used your Mirage Stalio in the extra monsters on your opponent used something like a Veiler or something, there was no way you were going to go into a Bailings, and you had to link away your Stalio for Sunlight Wolf. But now you don't even have to do that, so you can keep the Stalio on the field. So being able to make Stalio consistently and make sure that it can stay on the field is actually really good, so you need to max out on the level 3 advantage. And Foxy, I think, is pretty much the best normal summon. Maybe it's better than even Buffalo, because being able to get into the traps means that you will be able to go not only for your Stalio but also for disruption, and using your Gazelle for Jaguar, which will give you recovery, because before, without Stalio, if you want to send a trap with your Gazelle, then you were not going to get back Gazelle with your Jaguar unless you have the perfect hand. But now being able to get to your Gazelle and your Jaguar very, very easily with your Stalio, getting more monsters and more spells and traps in the graveyard, means that you can get to the plays more consistently and get to everything you need before you had to choose one of them, and now you can do all of them. 3 copies of Spinny. Spinny is pretty good. You need to play 3 now because it's just the freest level 3 monster in the deck. You normal summon it, you send for Bailings, and you bring it back. It's pretty good. I also play another card that has synergy with level 3 monsters coming back from the grave, so you can get to Stalio more consistently. You had to play 2 Spinny before, but now absolutely 3 of. 2 copies of Jaguar. The reason you play 2 is because of desires, and maybe because people will start playing DD Crow in the next format, just because Drytron might be the best deck, and DD Crow is a really good card against Drytron and a lot of other decks, so you don't want this one Jaguar to get banished, so playing 2 makes sure that even if you play desires and even if your opponent DD Crows one away, then you can still have the second one to make sure that you have the plays. And this card makes the limiting of Stalio not being that important, because if it was a 2 or 3, with just 1 it doesn't matter, because you can just put it back to the extra deck with your Jaguar, so you don't care that it's at 1. Yes, you were playing 2 before, but at 1 it's perfectly fine. You just put it back whenever you want your Jaguar, and you can summon it again, so it's an Xyz monster you can use over and over again, so it doesn't really matter that it's limited. 1 Falco. Falco is a really good card. I think it's a bit underrated, and it gives you line of plays that the deck doesn't have without it, not only because of the traps, but being able to recycle cards like Gazelle before you can use your Sunlight Wolf's effect to recycle something like an Ash, because yes, you want Gazelle in your hand, but if you have an Ash in your grave, it's very tempting to go for that and keep Gazelle there when you use Sunlight Wolf. But being able to use Falco's effect to get back your Gazelle means that you can get your Ash and your Gazelle, so you get disruption and your follow-up, and it gives you some line of plays that are really interesting, and I think One-Off is a really good card to play. Now for the non-Salamangreat monsters, we have 3 copies of Flame Buffalo. Before there was the debate if Debug was better than Buffalo, and I could see why, because you didn't have a really good way of searching Gazelle consistently, but still people did not really like Debug because it was a really great choke point for the deck. If it got stopped, then you couldn't do much unless you had a Silent Mining, so Buffalo was a more consistent card that gave you disruption even if you couldn't go to Gazelle. But now, because of Stalio, you can get to Gazelle very, very consistently almost every single game, so it's absolutely mandatory that you play Buffalo over Debug. I think Debug is a really bad card for the deck right now. Maybe a One-Off is fine if you can play 1 with Silent Mining to search it, but still I don't think that's necessary. And you play a higher count of Salamangreat monsters now, so Buffalo is even better than before, because when you're playing 2 Fox and 2 Spinny, sometimes you might have less monsters and you will not be able to discard something with Buffalo, but now you play so many monsters, so it will always be live, so I think this card is much better to play than Debug now. 3 copies of Parallel Exceed. The reason Nibiru exists makes this card mandatory for the deck, even if you don't like the card, which I have seen a lot of people not play, some decks I have seen not play. Just being able to go for your Rafflesia to go for your Gravediggers to stop this deck's Bane of Existence. I mean, come on, everyone. The joke is that this deck loses to Nibiru, so you have to play around it, and having your opponent play 3 Nibiru and you playing 3 Parallel Exceed mean that the chances are almost equal of both of you having the one in your hand. So going for Rafflesia, I think, is absolutely necessary because it covers the biggest weakness of the deck. 2 copies of Sea Archiver. Yes, we're playing Sea Archiver back again in the deck. You can play pretty much any kind of level 3 extender you want, but Sea Archiver is by far the better one for 2 reasons. First of all, it's a Cyber's monster, so you can send it to the grave with Buffalo to draw cards, and also it's a card that you can discard with Cyanide Mining, because if you had something like any of the Psychic Wielder, the Tracker, or anything like that, you could not discard it, you had to special summon from the hand. But discarding this card and searching maybe like Gazelle or a Spinny, or if you have the Spinny, then you can use Spinny's effect, bring it back from the grave onto your Bailing's Marker. You can bring this card back from the grave, so it's an extended that can be special summoned from the hand and from the graveyard, so it counts as a free discard for Buffalo and Cyanide Mining. So this card is such a better card, and it's also a really good card because it's a Cyber's monster, and you need to play more cards that facilitate your combos, because there are other cards that you can get in the extra deck to make sure that your plays go off and that lock you into Cybers, which is a card that the deck did not have back then, but it has now, which is another reason the deck has more tools now than it used back then, which is why the deck, I think, is a lot better. Not a lot better than before just because Gazelle and Circle are still limited, but it still has more options than before, because Gazelle and Circle being limited, yes, it hurts the consistency, but the ceiling is basically the same. For the Hunters, play 3 copies of Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom, if you don't like this card and you play Salamangreat, unfortunately you have to play it, because it's the only hand trap in this particular deck that you absolutely have to run, because it's a fire monster. Being able to recycle it with your Sunlight Wolf is just so important, and sometimes even summoning it to go into Stalio, because level 3 is really, really good, so it's not that bad either. And Ash Blossom is so generic that I don't see a reason why not to play it, especially in a deck that you can keep recycling it every single turn to use it over and over again. For the spells, we have 1 copy of Circle. Obviously, you search all your cards. This is a really good bait to set when you get it back with your Wolf, so your opponent doesn't know which backer to hit when you have the trap and this, so you can just chain it when your opponent tries to Cosmic Cycle into something, so you can get another monster. 1 copy of Sanctuary. Yep, you're playing Sanctuary. There's no reason to just play more than 1. Just search it with Balix whenever you want. 3 copies of Will. I really like 3 copies of Will. This is another way to play around Nibiru, because if you're relying on Parallel Exceed, sometimes it's not that consistent and you will get Nibiru'd even when you don't have it. But this card makes sure that even if you get Nibiru'd, you can still at least bring back a Link monster to make a card like your Roar live, so you don't lose completely, because ending with no monsters means that your traps are also dead, unless you use the bad effect of Rage, which is really, really neg. So this is why the Wheel is such a great card, and it's a card that keeps you in the game every single turn, just because being able to bring back all those monsters every single turn means that you always have something to do. And also the second effect is one you use when you want to completely blow out your opponent and go for the big push, which is why Will, I think, is such an important card. Sometimes you even go out of your way to send to the grave with Gazelle to recycle with your Wolf. That's how good it is, and I think it's absolutely necessary to max it out. 3 copies of Cyanide Mining, of course, searching all of your monsters. 1 copy of Cold Buy. This deck can sometimes lose to Droll, which is kind of unfortunate, so this is why you need to play this card, because Droll, I think, is going to be a really good main deck-worthy card in the next format because of Drytron, so you don't want to lose to something like a Droll when you use your Cyanide Mining, and then you have maybe a Buffalo or something like that, and you cannot even search your Sanctuary, so you need to be able to stop that. And 2 copies of Desires. Desires is a good card because the only card you don't care about banishing is the Sanctuary. You can win games without Circle and without Gazelle, especially now that you have your Stalio, and with Stalio sometimes you can even get Gazelle out of the deck even before you use Desire, so the only thing you need to pay attention to before activating this card is just normal summoning any Cyber's monster, going into Bailing, searching your Sanctuary, and then you can use this card without any fear. And the extra cards in this deck is so important because you can draw hand traps, you can draw traps. The deck has a recursive engine that keeps coming back, but you need more disruption because it's a mid-range combo deck, so you need to be able to get as much disruption as possible so you don't get blown out, and this is why the extra +1 is so good. For the traps, play 2 copies of Roar. 2 is perfectly fine, you don't need to max out any of the traps. I think 2 are great just because of cards of Desires, and especially Roar, you can run away with playing only 1 Rage, but I think you have to play 2 Roar just because you're going to use its effect sometimes to set itself back from the grave, so it's going to get banished, so you need to get the other one during the mid game, so this is why I think play 2. But I also played 2 copies of Rage because when you hard draw one of these, you just send the other one with Gazelle, and there are scenarios where you hard draw both of them and you don't need to send anything. But even if you hard draw both of the same card twice, it doesn't matter, because if you set 2 copies of Rage, first of all, it means that you're safe to Cosmic Cyclone. You don't have to negate Cosmic Cyclone with your Roar, or 2 copies of Rage because you can use the other one. But if you set both copies, then you can use one during your opponent's turn and one during your own turn immediately, and then add it back with your Wolf, which means that you add more pressure to your opponent. So drawing multiples of the same card isn't that bad as it sounds. 3 copies of Impermanence. This is the flex spot. I think you can replace this with pretty much any hand trap you want, or if you think that any other card is better, maybe Solar call them Strike or Torrential. Torrential is also a really good card in this deck, but I don't know exactly how good it's going to be against a deck like Drytron. But still, you can replace this 3-off with anything you want, but I just preferred Impermanence because it's a hand trap that is generic and it doesn't loot to Trip Tactics talent. And the last card is Gravedigger's Trap Hole. You need to play this with Rafflesia. You just make sure that you don't lose to Nibiru because this is the only card that absolutely destroys your day, so you need to play around it as much as possible. For the extra deck, we have 3 copies of Bailings. Of course, you need to max it out. I've seen people play 2, but to be honest, having more copies of it in the extra deck means that you can keep playing, because sometimes when you don't have it, then you have to normal summon your Gazelle because you cannot use any of your Cybers monsters to go into that, and then that means that you lose even more power. So I think playing 3 is absolutely necessary, and you go through all 3 copies of them in the grave too by protecting your monsters, because this deck gets into a lot of simplified grind games, so you're not going to be able to grind if you don't have these in the graveyard because your monsters are weak, so you need to be able to protect them, especially now with Stalio. Keeping Stalio on the field means that your follow-up turn is so much better, so this is why this card is so important. 3 copies of Sunlight Wolf, of course, it's a card you need to max out. It gets back all your spells and traps, it gets back your monsters, getting back your Ash Blossom for more disruption, getting back your Gazelle for follow-up. This card is absolutely insane. 2 copies of Heat Leo. You use Heat Leo a lot. To be honest, you don't really use it for the firepower, you just use it to bounce back back row, especially against matchups like Eldritch. This is so important to bounce all these cards back into the deck so they don't float during the end phase, and being able to use the Bailings to protect this from Conquistador means that your opponent is not going to be able to deal with it very easily, so this is why this card is really good, and it can pretty much play around any monster because it just lowers its attack points and runs it over, so it's a really good card. 1 copy of Splash Mage. Splash Mage gives you access to access code much easily, especially if you draw even a redundant monster like a Jaguar without anything else. Having this 1 Splash Mage in your extra deck means that you can go into access code Toker with just 1 card, which is a really good card to play. Unfortunately, because I do play some rank 4s, I do not have space for Phoenix, but I'll show you a monster you can cut for Phoenix later. We have the Update Jammer combo with 1 copy of Update Jammer and 1 copy of Transcode Toker. This can OTK on a clear field. That's 8100 damage, so that's a really good combo too. And we also play the 1 copy of Access Code to be able to destroy your opponent. If you don't have Access Code and you don't want to pay for Access Code right now, you can basically replace this with Nightmare Phoenix or a 2nd copy of Transcode, which can come up a lot because Transcode is the firepower of the deck along with Heat Leo. So if you don't have the money and you don't want to spend for Access Code right now, don't worry, it's not absolutely necessary. It's a good card for the deck, but it's not absolutely necessary. You can still win without it. So a 2nd copy of Transcode or a Nightmare Phoenix are perfectly fine. And for the Xyz monsters, here we have the 1 copy of Salamangreat Mirage Stalio. This card offers so much for the deck. It makes it much more consistent going first, being able to go into your Gazelle from your deck whenever you want, and also gives it going 2nd power with its bounce effect, which is something that the deck really lacked, because what the deck did going 2nd was either it had to hard commit to an access code, which means that the follow-up play for your opponent's turn, you did not have something like a Roar or a Rage Live unless you had the nuts and you had also the Will of the Salamangreat, or you had to set your traps and make sure that your opponent plays in them so you can break their board, and this is when you needed to play cards like Strike and Torrential. But now Stalio makes sure that you can get even more monsters on the field and also bounce one of your opponent's monsters so you can break the board much more easily. So this is why this card is so good, and being able to keep it on the field and protect it during your opponent's turn, to have it again for your follow-up turn already on the field, is so important to be able to go into those plays because you can just destroy your opponent. But be careful, because now with this card there's also the restriction for the fire monsters, because it's something that people had forgotten that this deck even had because they were playing without it and the deck did not have any restrictions without it. But now you have to be careful when you use Stalio's effect and make sure that you can do the correct plays. You will not be able to use something like Access Code's effect or something like Splash Mage, so yeah, be careful about that. And for the rank 4s, play of course 1 copy of Rafflesia for your Grave Dig with your Parallel Exceed, and I play 1 copy of Dweller. I like Dweller in matchups that I know that Dweller absolutely destroys, and especially if I'm playing at locals, maybe because I know which hand drops people at least are maining, so I know that my opponent is not maining Ibiru, then there's no reason to summon Rafflesia. I'm just gonna summon Dweller and win the game, because against some decks Dweller is just an auto win, so that's why I have it here. But you can replace this with Nightmare Phoenix if you don't think it's going to come up enough and you need something maybe to deal with. There can be only one, because it might be a card that people are going to play, especially if they try to play Strikers. People are going to play There Can Be Only One, and this deck absolutely gets destroyed by that trap, so maybe playing Phoenix or even main taking some back removal can be an option too. So yep, that's the deck, guys. We're going to see Salamangreat back in the format. People really enjoyed this deck. People were playing it even without Stalio, and now that Stalio is back, this deck just got so much better. It's a budget deck, so you're going to see it a lot, so be prepared for that. If you don't plan on playing it, you have to play cards at least in your side deck to deal with it. This is why I think cards like DD Crow are going to be really good for the upcoming format, because there are so many decks that get hurt by this trap, by this hand trap, and also this deck is one exception. I mean, being able to DD Crow the traps or the Gazelle or the Jaguar is so huge. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.